Welcome to the first episode of Crypto Philosophical. We are your hosts. I am Anonymous, and this is
Crypto Mike.
Crypto MIC.
That's right.
So, in our first episode, in order to set the stage for all future episodes where we're able to discuss decentralized blockchain technology and its potential and future applications, as well as the current state of decentralized ledgers and networks. Mike, it's really going to be up to you because I'm not the expert in this. You are. I'm more from a business side. You're more of a trader, and you have a bit of a background in this more than I do. So, what are we looking at right now?
Well, let's start with just the first words here. Cryptocurrency. Okay. We're kind of playing on that name with the title of our show, Crypto Philosophical here. So let's just jump into what is cryptocurrency. Many people have heard of Bitcoin. It's kind of like a digital gold. It's internet money is also referred to. Cryptocurrency is based on cryptography. So it's money, it's a currency that's based on cryptography. And that's kind of an interesting thing because Bitcoin was the first, and now there's thousands of currencies, digital currencies that are based on cryptography. And for anyone who doesn't know what cryptography is, really simply put, cryptography is the art of writing and or solving codes. I mean, that is pretty sexy when you just think about that for a second. Okay, we have money that's connected to the art of writing or solving codes. It's like, wait a second, that sounds kind of like we have a mathematical money here that is not controlled or run by any nation state, but it's a
so could you say that cryptocurrency is backed by the sound application of mathematics?
Yes, 100%.
So when people are thinking of cryptocurrency and they're thinking, well, what's it backed by? It's this sort of nebulous thing that exists in the nowhere of this thing. What is this? That's what I was asking as well. So since it's cryptography and it's this coin that's backed by the sound application of complex mathematical equations,
it's also backed by people as well. And what this, I mean, like anything in this world, is people back it. So what we got here is a worldwide decentralized computer network. All these spots you're seeing here around the globe are basically Bitcoin stations, we could call them.
So like part of the database, part of the network, I guess you could say.
Yes, it's like all these basically all these are individual computer networks that are plugged into the Bitcoin network that formulate like integral bits of the Bitcoin network.
And what are they doing for the network? What are they contributing?
Well, so they're broadcasting the network, and part of broadcasting the network is that each node holds a copy of the entire blockchain. So each of these individual points is hosting basically all the data of the Bitcoin blockchain.
And that's what makes it decentralized.
Yeah.
So, okay, so it's backed by...
Like, there's not just one server farm, which you get like in, a typical like centralized system.
Yeah, like Visa.
Right.
And nobody owns this.
No, so that's the other thing. This network is an entirely voluntary network, which was built out of just basically humble grassroots, which is an incredible thing because this thing just started off as like a good idea that was based on being solution oriented to the calamities of the current financial system, right around the time of 2008, 2009. I believe Bitcoin was started to be created in around 2007, before its white paper was published at the end of 2008, beginning of 2009. But it was basically like it had been in the making for some time before that, just based on the history we've had with money, where central banks basically have a massive monopoly of control over how the world works and functions.
Through money. Like
Yes.
money,
Yes.
I've heard
Yes.
others say, smarter people than me say, that
It's the root of all
that
evil.
money is the operating system of the world.
Yes. Oh, that's a very intelligent way, I think, to regard and look at money and its role in the world. So to me, it's kind of a fallacy and a farce when we just basically accept that around the world we have these governing bodies that apparently are looking out for the best interests of the world and the people in the world with the money system. When if we do a little due diligence into oh, look at this, the debt clock here. So yeah, there's massive. I mean, we basically are in an economic system where it's like a race to the bottom in so many ways. The lowballer effect, I like to call it.
The lowballer effect, yes. So no, I understand what you're saying. So this debt clock is really the outcome of what is known today as sort of the fractional reserve banking system.
Yes.
And if I could jump in here, because I feel like I understand this part, and that is where a bank, say it's your local bank at your state level, say you're in the United States and you're in, I don't know, Georgia, and you put your money in a bank and you think, okay, great, my money's safe, I'm putting it in the bank. Maybe if you're, sort of savvy, you go into the bank and you get a savings account that gives you 5% or 2.5% or something. Or you invest in RSPs or some sort of like scheme that the bank offers you where it's going to, you're going to have your sort of risk averse or your median risk or your aggressive sort of portfolio, and you can go for it and maybe get, something around 5-10% a year or something like that, depending on.
You ever notice that it doesn't even necessarily make, like, the way the bank explains that stuff to you, like it's very kind of almost bare bones, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this or this, and
it's snake oil. It's snake oil. All they want when they're doing that, because there's two things that they can do, and according to the rules of the bank, there's two things. They can put it into your savings account, and then it has to be sitting there and it has to be protected. It has to be essentially available to you at all times, right? But if you invest it through them into these sort of funds, cash pools, what they're doing is they're doing something. They're encumbering your capital.
Okay.
And how they're doing that is they're issuing, in general terms, bank debt paper. And they're issuing that into the market with the base commodity that's backing the paper is your money.
As like basically the debt liability.
Right. And so they're able, by law, this is just keep 10%, right, of the deposit, right? So your deposit is the 10%. Okay, it's referred to as reserves.
Yeah.
Right? And so they can lend that out by law as much as 20 times.
Oh, 20 times. Wow, I thought it was
right.
10.
It's up to 20 times.
Okay.
Because what happens is they'll create other instruments which can also then be leveraged or encumbered. So like a standby letter of credit, for instance.
Right.
A standby letter of credit can be backed by as little as 10%. But then you can take that standby letter of credit and liquidate it through various means, and then leverage the full amount of the value of that standby letter of credit. So say that you've got a 10% deposit, it's $100 million worth of people's money in the state of Georgia.
Okay.
And they issue $1 billion worth of standby letters of credit. Those standby letters of credit then go into the issuance of derivatives. And those derivatives can be issued another 10 times. So in fact, it's actually 100 times as much as your initial base amount. Now, we talk about how much currency, actual national money has been issued around the world, and the various amounts come out to about 70 to 80 trillion. Sometimes they're as low as 40 trillion. It's a really hard number to figure out, right?
Okay.
But that's the basic amount that people think it is that are supposedly in the know. And yet, when you look at the derivatives market, if you want proof of this fractional lending system, if you're disbelieving of me, you just look at what it is in terms of its total market cap worldwide. As of December 2012, it was estimated to be 632 trillion. Okay.
Right.
And if the base amount of money in the world, actual currency, is closer to 40 trillion, let's say by this year, and actually the estimates of this derivatives market are up into the quadrillions now. It's supposedly 1.2 quadrillion at the high water mark. And of course, it's fluctuating all the time because the value of these instruments is speculative, right? But it's based on what? Right? It's based on the banks issuing these bank debt papers and packaging them together into instruments that other groups of people are trading and trying to get other buyers for. And as like anything, if you run out of buyers, those things collapse in value, right?
They go belly up. They
go belly up. Well, here we have as of this year, a $663 trillion market that, I don't know how much exposure there is. I'm not an expert in the derivatives market, but let's just say there's 100 trillion worth of exposure. Well, that exceeds the amount of money there is in the world to back up that the value of those instruments.
Oh yeah, that's kind of like always the case based on the current economic framework, is that there's more debt always, because by the very nature of a money, basically like a backing, it's like the liability is created with that as like the deposit. And so that, well, like you just explained, you can basically 100x on the 10%.
Right, and that's why governments continue to operate and sort of be la-di-da about everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Because every year, though their national debt just sort of churns out at these, tens of thousands per second.
Yeah.
Their gross domestic product is there to counterbalance it and serve as a base commodity for the derivatives market and other markets. I mean, derivatives market is just one market that's at 1.2 quadrillion. It's not all markets. Okay. The total value of the stock market worldwide is somewhere around 70 trillion. Right?
And the futures market alone is, I think, in the quadrillions.
Right. You get my point. So this is a system that has been engineered specifically, I think, one could say.
Absolutely. It's kind of like it's almost like a different way the average person looks at debt, and the way a big business or government looks at debt.
Well, let me finish what I was going to say. So this has been engineered, as a secret world.
Pretty much.
Now that secret world, what's secret about it is the people who have their hands on the instruments that are being issued. So that's the central banks and the national banks, and the currency issuers. So Federal Reserve, even though the Federal Reserve is not a federal entity, it's privately owned, and they own the contract to issue the U.S. dollar, and they issue that currency. This brings up another point, but I'll get around to it. So they issue that currency, and they keep issuing more currency into the market, which is called quantitative easing, which is meant to sort of handle inflation. But really what it is it's a massive way to get people into debt. The more money you have to lend, the more people you can lend it to, the more debt you can put them in. And in this case, the Federal Reserve is lending to the national government of the United States, and they're issuing every dollar, whether it's electronic or paper currency, physical currency, they're issuing it with a tiny amount of debt attached to it. And that debt is secured by the tax system in the United States. So essentially your taxes are sitting as the base derivative of an entire other market that gets exploded over top of the net value of your tax system on an annual basis. That's a completely secret world of money that people don't know is there. And it's entirely engineered to generate almost a limitless amount of perceived value so that they can go around doing whatever they want. I mean, there's black projects, there's just extreme wealth beyond belief that certain people live by. There's the entire... politics is really engineered for that. And it's creating a smoke screen around what this money market is really about. And it's really just debt slavery to the world. How do I know that? Well, look at this debt clock right here, national debt, right? So everybody that's born in the United States today is born with approximately $250,000 in national debt associated to their name that they are then, for the rest of their life, expected and not even aware that they're paying off through their commitment to the tax system. So it's insanity is what it is. And it's not backed by anything. We were just talking about the amount of money that's actually in physical money states. So there's about 92% of all money in the world is electronic money anyway, and 8% is physical money. And then there's this big debate around Bitcoin, for instance, as to whether or not it's sound money or can be considered money. And the only real reason there's a debate is because they know they can't control it. It's decentralized. Nobody owns it. Yeah. And it's more sound than their own money system.
So this is what's so interesting here is because this has been like call it a problem or a challenge for a long time throughout history, is creating like payment systems, alternative currencies that exist beyond the control and regulation of any one nation state. And so Bitcoin really is like the first world currency that's decentralized and beyond any one border state. So that in itself is a remarkable accomplishment. And it's going, this very point is going unrealized way too much. It gets way more news attention about when the price of it is at like all-time highs, and there's
all-time lows or massive
all-time lows, right? Or there's like some story about someone using it that was a celebrity or a criminal. Funny how criminals and celebrities are like held in the same breath. Interesting.
Well, I don't think that's the interesting part. I think the interesting part is that they just try and brand money that's being used. No, just let me finish this. So they just try and brand the money, cryptocurrency, as if it's facilitating all crime around the world, when we all know that money of every kind is touched by crime of every kind.
Absolutely.
But the headline is just focused on one thing and tries to brand it. I mean, it's branding, right? It's all branding. And that's all I wanted to say about that. So
okay, no, that's a very good point. Branding, yes. So
let's go into this. What's is
okay. Screw. Is Bitcoin gold 2.0? Yeah, it totally is gold 2.0. It's already, if we look at its short life history, it's already served as an incredible store of value. It's way easier to exist as a store of value than gold is. Gold, for the most part, you're getting your gold from some gold dealer. I mean, I guess you could say that's the same. You're going to get your Bitcoin from some Bitcoin dealer or whatnot. But
call it an exchange. How about that?
Okay, an exchange. It is harder to store your gold yourself in this day and age. So most people, they have somebody else that's like their gold holder for them and whatnot. And gold doesn't break down into like small little units of account so easily. Whereas Bitcoin, one Bitcoin goes over to 8 decimal places. So that can be broken down into the smallest itty little bits of measurement of account, which is a pretty incredible thing. I see here you got pulled up like ancient money. This is a pretty cool point, because it's important, I think, to understand money as one of the most ancient forms of technology in existence. It's like one of the earliest forms of language that we've used throughout civilization.
Right. I mean, obviously, you used to pay with cows and cattle and bushels of wheat whatever, right? And it's a very cumbersome, very difficult, very slow-moving process, and of course that hinders economic growth. It hinders the storage of value and the buildup of value towards future investments, which we'll get into later. We're going to get into many things. We're just setting the stage here. So actually, one of the things that reminds me, because I've watched so many documentaries about money recently, is that money has been so many different things. It hasn't just been gold. One of the most successful forms of money was in the United Kingdom under the the imperial rulership of the kings and queens that were just sticks.
Right.
Sticks were these bond trading instruments that were the most successful, most stable form of money in probably all history, all recorded history. So really what money is the agreement of value.
Yeah, it's an accounting system. It's like
Right.
an accounting system, you can trust it. And that really basically sums up what, like the blockchain is basically. It's a ledger accounting system.
Mm-hmm. So the origins and philosophical ideology behind Bitcoin are what?
Okay. Well, yeah. So, like we got here, the cypherpunk movement. This is basically like a whole group of cryptographers, and cryptographers, like as I defined earlier, cryptography is the art of writing and/or solving codes, and that's based on like the study of mathematics, engineering, electricity, physics, basically all the science fields together,
Mm-hmm.
looking at various things and solving advanced mathematics.
Right. So
Right.
so you have this cypherpunk movement.
Right. So it's like all basically these wizards of, yeah, let's call them wizards for
Yeah, let's
simplicity.
rename it because punk means what?
Punk gets a bad, right, worthless. So you got these wizards that are definitely not worthless,
Yeah, they're crypto
who
wizards.
are, basically very intelligent in mathematics to varying degrees because they're plugged into the,
Electrical engineering,
yes, into,
cryptography, just a confluence, and mathematics, of course, right? So just the confluence of all these very high-end sort of
right.
specialized fields.
So, okay, so if you scroll down, what the cypherpunks have been all about is this, okay? Because the cypherpunks very aware that money has been like the operating system. These are
Mhm.
like basically all computer programmers.
Aware that we're all juggernauting into
Yeah,
future debt
they
slavery.
get the debt clock. Like
Mhm.
that's not a new thing that they just saw today. They've known that for a long time. So because they've known about money being kind of like a challenging point within the world with us humans, these are all previous attempts of digital money. Okay, trying to create a digital money that's not controlled and regulated by the nation state. We go through this list here. There is a lot of them. I think PayPal may be on this list. Yeah, it is on this list. And so you could say of all of these past projects, PayPal was the most successful. And if you even if you ever talk to Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, they will tell you that their goal was to create like their own currency. So they didn't quite succeed, but both those dudes find Bitcoin very interesting.
Well, they had to facilitate the transaction between so-called fiat cash, right?
Yep,
And their own platform and their own network, and
for
obviously
sure.
that means they had to give in at some point
They did.
to the integration of the monetary system as it is today, and of course that's going to disintegrate the initial intention. But the interesting thing about Bitcoin is it hasn't had to do that.
No, exactly, because there's no company. There's no company behind Bitcoin.
Right?
And that's
There's no Elon Musk trying to brand his name to everything that would save the world.
yeah. I mean, exactly. So if we look here, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,
Tons.
17, 34, 68, 70,
There's
80,
many.
80, 83, 84. 84 on the list here. I gotta
Okay.
say.
84. That's pretty good.
Uh, so that's
Netcash, I think, is still around.
okay. So some of these had like some
eCash.
success, but basically they didn't work, or they worked in limited ways, right? So my point is that all of these projects were inspired, created by cypherpunks in some way.
Mm-hmm.
That went into basically the genesis that is Bitcoin. All these previous works.
Mm-hmm.
And so the white paper isn't even that long of a read. It's actually quite an interesting read, and it's not too technical for the most part. There is some spark spots that you might find technical or have no idea what they're talking about, but you could still read it through, and yeah, it could totally expand your awareness.
It also gives you just a very simple template or springboard in which to go and investigate things so that you can
Yes.
understand it. I mean, even if you
Yes.
can't understand
Look at that
this,
math. Yes.
you are going to understand what hash codes are and what all that stuff is in terms of how the system operates and creates the trustless system.
Right.
So going back, we're going to get into, by the way, in future episodes, exactly the story of the creation of this, and we're really just setting the stage. So we just want to cover a lot of things right now. So if you feel like we're speeding ahead, don't worry.
We're pretty excited just to
just subscribe. We've already got 13 episodes in the can. We're just going back to the first episode to make sure we covered everything properly in the first episode. And of course, there's challenges with anything that's new, especially when it goes up against something so vast, as the world debt clock and the fractional lending system and the derivatives market, which people who you don't know and can't really see are profiting from on a monumental scale. And they really have control by virtue of their ability to buy and own anything and everything, especially the media. They can really control the narrative about everything.
Yeah, so leave this page open for
sure.
For
so where we're at is that it's a challenge, but it's really Bitcoin has launched an entirely new market and has really got its footing towards the promised land of a decentralized money system that cannot be corrupted the way the derivatives market, the fractional lending system, and the centralized banking system has in terms of enslaving people worldwide vis-a-vis their operating system of money.
So yeah, quite an interesting point here is that from Bitcoin, which was a huge revolution in and of itself.
Massively forward. Yeah.
I mean, we, a long time ago in history, you would simply be killed by the king of the land for trying to make an alternative form of currency.
Oh, sure. And if you tried to skim off the top?
Right, forging. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, or what do they call it when the money changers in England were chipping off little bits of the coin?
Forging. I think.
No, they weren't forging. They were doing. It was something else, and it was essentially chipping off little incremental bits of the silver coins and gold coins.
Or
flinting, maybe flinting. I can't remember.
Okay, but yeah. So basically, like, there's been a massive issue of control in the world for a long time with money. And now since Bitcoin, which was this grassroots thing, and it's a world currency, like that point I feel like can't be stressed enough because it's now plugged in to within every country in the world. That's incredible.
Yeah, and at its height here,
you can travel around the world with your Bitcoin. You don't even have to hold on to your Bitcoin. You know your code for your Bitcoin. That's it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, this shows that there are 4,200 or 4,300 and some nodes right now. But in fact, the high water mark is 9,200. So there's a massive contribution going on. A lot of this is mining, and we'll get into all that stuff later. But it does create a decentralized network, and it creates a peer-to-peer opportunity. So right now, China is trying to ban it. Well, how can you ban it? Well, they're trying to shut down the exchanges. They can shut down the individual massive sort of farming operations, if you will. But if you're on the network and you have, say, a wallet or a dead wallet or whatever it is, Mike's going to explain that in other future episodes. But essentially, it's a peer-to-peer network. You don't need the permission of an exchange. You don't need the permission of a government. No. All you need is someone else across this network here willing to buy or exchange your currency, and you can move it around.
Yes. In various places around the world, that has been how governments have somewhat kind of been maybe not accelerating the adoption, not like maybe actively doing their damnedest to accelerate the rate of growth of Bitcoin. because around the world, different businesses have different challenges based on which jurisdiction your business is in terms of what money rules you have to follow, because the laws are not uniform with regards to money in this world, which is kind of an interesting thing when every place in the world uses money. It's like the definitions about how you're allowed to interact with money vary quite a lot, which is kind of bizarre. So Bitcoin, it is its own form of money. And that proves to be very challenging to governments, because governments are trying to be very careful about what they say about this, because they don't want to shoot themselves in the foot for their taxation theft system that's become basically like a voluntarily enforced system in which the majority of the world participates in. And it's a fascinating point, because as the world exists right now, you don't pay taxes on the exchange of currencies. So like if you're switching your Canadian dollars into pounds, you're not paying a tax on that currency exchange. You may pay an exchange fee by the money maker, right? But you're not paying
the money changer.
Exactly, but you're not paying a direct tax on that. And so opening up peer-to-peer monies that are worldly in their very nature kind of changes the dynamics of the money system of control the way we've known it. Because now it kind of opens up, the possibilities of regular everyday people having these safe havens for their money, where they don't just necessarily have to willy-nilly give 30 to 50% of it away to their government because they choose to hold it in that form of currency.
Well, let's talk about the political charades that are going on around that. I mean, obviously these financial centralized financial banks, which are nationalistic in nature or global in nature, are obviously threatened by this emergence, which they
it's a huge.
Let me finish, please.
Okay.
So they're obviously threatened by what's going on. And they're creating these narratives like, oh, now they're against it, now they're for it, now they're against it, now they're for it. So what's really going on with that? What do we see here? What is this? China's warming up again. The IMF is saying cryptocurrencies pose challenges to financial system, and obviously that's a scare tactic for people who don't know about cryptocurrency or what its true value is. You've got this Jens Wiedmann guy who a bunch of months ago came out and flat out said we can't trust cryptocurrency because it's not centralized. Meanwhile, the euro is just a total
tanker.
It's just a joke, right, for anybody who's in it, because you've got these nations that are essentially weights on the entire system, while others are sort of leaders, but they're kind of corrupt in their use and their manipulation of the power of the currency, like Germany. So what are we seeing here?
Well, so, you kind of outlined it pretty decently there. There's a lot of propaganda floating around the news in terms of what countries are doing about Bitcoin or what they're thinking. They're pro, they're not pro. They think there's challenges or regulating. There's a lot of shit talk happening, basically, because what Bitcoin ultimately really does is basically enforces self-honesty in systems, where if you're running a system that isn't really that great, by connecting Bitcoin or Bitcoin comes into the scene, it almost it becomes this superior system that's in place that makes the existing inferior systems that much more exposed as being inferior. So
you talk about propaganda. This is propaganda right here. It's saying that regulating Bitcoin is certainly better than an outright ban. Well, the obvious problem in that statement is that you cannot outright ban it.
Right. And kind of years ago, China kind of tried to do that. Or so they said. That might have even been a PR piece itself.
Well, that's really the firewall of China, the great firewall of China.
Right, which is kind of a weird thing again as well.
So it's unsustainable, right? It's an unsustainable attempt to try and blockade this completely unblockadable thing, except for the ownership of the internet.
Right.
which we'll get into in future episodes. So I don't want to like sort of get too deep into that. But essentially, the network itself is exposed to risk by virtue of the centralized ownership of the internet.
On parts of it. Yeah, it's like the internet has kind of been like the way we use it mostly, it's been kind of siloed into, centralized components, because that's been like the business structure, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But on like the bare bones basic architecture, infrastructure to the internet, it's actually based so much so on the peer-to-peer point.
Mm-hmm.
With the computers connecting together to make clusters.
So this guy is trying to create some scare tactics by saying that the world risks another financial crash, and it's supposedly being pegged to the emergence of cryptocurrencies. Oh, say again?
Oh, that's a chick, laggard. She's
whatever.
Just
another goon, as far as I'm concerned. So the fund is concerned with bank concentration, rising lending by shadow banks in China. Are you kidding me? This is what I'm worried about. The fractional lending system, okay, that you're not talking about or exposing to anybody. This right here, which you're not acknowledging even exists on a daily basis. And you're building up this massive exposure to financial collapse in the value of these fake instruments. So that's what I'm concerned about.
Totally.
So let's go back to that.
Okay, I just want to say one quick piece to add on to that. If we look at the Great Depression of the 1920s, 1930s, right?
Yep.
Why did that? Well, a part of the reason with that happening was there was a real lack of confidence in establishments at that time, where it's like a run on the banks. A lot of people wanted to cash out.
Well, one of the reasons. Okay, let me summarize that for you in just like a minute.
Okay.
So the financial crash that we all have heard about, that sort of propagated, supposedly created the Great Depression, was essentially the bond market. So the governments were issuing bonds, which are bank debt paper, and they were finding that it was working really well.
Right.
And they were finding that people were buying them up like crazy. This was essentially a result of the First World War. They needed to finance the First World War, and so they issued bonds around the world. People bought them up. The value went sky high. And so individual corporate entities decide, well, we can do the same thing by issuing similar bank debt instruments, which are essentially shares in companies, and put them on a stock exchange, and people will buy them up like crazy. And this started the Roaring 20s sort of dividends market, right? So people were buying these, shares in these companies and getting dividends and living off the fat of their dividends. And banks started issuing loans to people who wanted to buy more and more of these fake instruments. Right. And so it created an inflationary bubble that, of course, is unsustainable. And then as confidence in the stock market waned once in a while, like there was a couple of moments when there were no more buyers for new instruments at sky high prices, and so things started to fall. Mm-hmm. But the real issue is the banks were willing to lend that money out
in the first place.
And then when they had to call in the loans because the stock markets were changing, they were taking everybody's shares in exchange for the debt. They were losing their shirts. But who wasn't losing their shirt? The bank. The bank was gobbling up everything, right, at record lows. They were essentially buying up all the value in all the markets everywhere all at once. Yes, this created a massive scare in terms of the banks taking and seizing properties and seizing your life savings and seizing all of that. And so people were running to the bank to try and withdraw all their assets, all their funds. And that is what caused the Great Depression, is this massive. I mean, for decades after that, people who lived through that would hide their money in the mattress and at home instead of putting money in the bank.
Right.
So, yes, in a sense, you're right about, there was this massive run on the banks, but the run on the banks was created by the banks.
Yes. Very well articulated.
They didn't even have to all they had to do was shut their doors.
Totally, totally. So, yeah, where or why I wanted to bring that up
So it
is
was
that,
biggest theft in history.
yeah,
Biggest theft in history. And they stole from everybody. And this
everybody,
is the centralized banking system. And that's when
yes,
it really kicked off. The success of the centralized banking system was
uh-huh.
really kicked off by the Great Depression.
Depression, yeah,
Yeah, the
absolutely,
Great Depression was their biggest success.
integral, yeah.
It was the biggest theft of global wealth in history. And then of course as the markets came back slowly, and they invested on both sides of conflicts around the world to propagate war, they just reignited the whole barn market again,
Mhm.
while still holding on to all those assets.
So you can kind of understand why the International Monetary Fund, and the central bankers would say that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency proves to be a real challenge to financial regulators.
Uh-huh.
Because it's going to be a lot harder to steal somebody's fortune when they can put that into Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to get access to that because, you can't if that person is holding on to their private key.
Well, that sort of it puts this under stress. If you
It
can't
does.
collect taxes, right,
Mm-hmm.
then you can't use it as a base asset in all the fractional lending that they're doing around the world that they're not talking about.
Right.
Which is really just putting everybody in debt. They're all putting each other in debt, right?
Yeah, because it's kind of like, and if you look at even the biggest companies in the world now, it's like they're all doing these buyback issues, like on their stocks and
Right,
whatnot.
right. Which is one of the early signs of a sort of
Storm.
a fake correction in the market.
Yes.
Like when that sort of, I think they call it Black Friday. It was actually in October. It was in October. I don't know if it was the 23rd. But we could open it up. But anyway, the point is that there was one day in which the market crashed quite a bit, and it really caused the scare. And so these rich guys from Wall Street all went down to J.P. Morgan's in New York and said, "Oh, what do we got to do here?" And so they pooled together $300 million between them, and they all went in to the stock market and bought all these sort of blue chip shares,
Yeah.
at inflated prices to market correct, to create confidence in the market. And so they were overpaying for those shares, right?
Right.
Even though the shares were at a record low, they were paying higher prices for the shares to essentially regenerate and stimulate confidence in the market. And that's what you're talking about. They're buying back these deflated instruments, trying to reignite confidence in those instruments in order to.
Yeah, it's like it's an elaborate Ponzi in a way that's uses more eloquent words to make sense of it logically, rationally within the existing legal structures that support this activity.
Yeah. And people don't know about these things. Their financial
No.
literacy is basically
Right.
nil. And so they believe what the papers tell them. That's it. That's
Yeah.
the limit of their understanding. Why? Because they're too busy out there trying to make a living, trying to scratch a living under this incredible weight of debt lending system.
Well, it's kind of fascinating and ironically foreshadowing in a way, because the existing financial structures that we have is so much kind of like a cryptography in that it's it really is embodied by the art of writing, right? Like it's a very specialized vocabulary.
Well, it's the art of deception, really.
Well, yeah, I mean that's within the art of writing, right? Whether it's it's deception or not deception.
Well, it's simple. It's simple. When the Catholic Church was at the height of its power was when priests were the only ones who learned and spoke Latin. So they spoke all their ceremonies and all their masses in Latin. So the people didn't even know what the Bible said.
Yeah, we're casting all these spells, but you don't have to know the spelling. Don't worry about it.
We're your go-between. We're
just
the mediator between you and God, right? And
just agree. Agree. Stand, sit.
Yeah, exactly. Say the words when I raise my hand.
I tell you, raise your hand. Yeah, basic programming.
Yeah, basic programming. And there's no difference. There's no difference between that and what goes on with the financial markets today.
Totally.
People don't know what money is or how it's working or isn't working for them. They're being provided debt, which according to them creates a bit of an ease as some sort of moment in their life. And obviously financial stress is the worst stress in the world because it has no forgiveness. If you can't pay your bills, you go into jail, which is called bankruptcy, where you can't get credit for a while. And if you can't get credit, you can't get a cell phone. You can't
do shit.
You can't do anything. You can't have a car. You can't get a lease. You can't even probably get a rental agreement because you have to show that you have good credit. So you can't even move into.
What if you're a good person though? Like, you've been really working on yourself. You're a good person.
That's no value whatsoever.
Good attitude.
It's no value whatsoever. Not in the monetary system. There is no humanity in the monetary system. It's an inhuman
cold
system.
As ice.
Cold as ice, and if you die or end up on the street, doesn't matter, right? The system goes on. So there's that sort of
Where's the value in that kind of system?
Well, there's no value, and so it is a threat, and this is a threat, right? And this is what we're talking about. So in this series, we're going to talk about what ancient money is. Money is trust.
Oh, that's a really good
decentralized digital payment systems, Bitcoin, a digital currency, which is essentially 2.0, gold 2.0, because it has the same elemental aspects of storage of value, and it's, instead of being backed by the physical presence of gold, it's backed by the physical presence of this network and the reasonable application of sound mathematics, so ones and zeros, right? Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into the origins and philosophy of Bitcoin as well, and how it spawned this entire market.
So scroll to the bottom of that page.
Sure.
Just, okay, view all. How many cryptocurrencies do we got on the chart right now? Just out of curiosity here. I'm guessing it's over 1,000.
Yeah, it's still loading.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot.
Colossus XT.
So there's so many here, right? And it's like, they all have different values and whatnot. But the interesting thing about each of these, and some people might make arguments that some are scams, some are not, because you're dealing with people again, right? And it gets into the consciousness of where the people are at. But my point is, all of these essentially grassroots movements that spawned out of Bitcoin.
And it's no irony that Bitcoin's at the top of the list.
Oh, so it's like these are all new species of money, new species of like world money that didn't previously exist. And I feel like this is, an underlying big narrative that will continue to be talked about more and more. Because now you can have groups of people that align on principles and just like values that can decide, you know what? Yeah, we got people in this country, this country, this country, this country. Let's be a little bit radical and let's restructure the way we do trade with each other.
This is not radical. This is reasonable. Okay. So what is reasonable versus radical? The radical is that we've been branded, or anybody who purports to endorse this or is gung-ho on this or really recognizes what it is. Just because they are at that place in their psychology where they actually recognize what this is, they're radical. It seems radical from the position of fear, clinging to the outdated, completely corrupted, existing financial market. And let's go back to what money is. It's the operating system of our society, because it is the agreement of value. And it is the expression of trust in transaction. And so we're going to get into all that. And we're going to get into what peer-to-peer does and why it's a trustless system so that you can trust it. It's not some shadowy bunch of people with high-powered server farms screwing the world over. That's the exact opposite. And yet that's the narrative that is really pumped out. Now you want to go back to Napster. Let's talk about Napster a little bit, just in terms of what its place is in this whole genesis.
Yeah, I mean, Napster definitely gets some credit for sure in terms of really opening up the potential here. I mean,
Mhm,
file sharing internet, right?
mhm, mhm.
Like that. I mean, that's incredible concept.
Now, some would argue that this had a really negative impact on the music industry
Uh,
by driving down the value of people's creative work to the point
uh,
that they can't make a living, to the point that computers and models are now the music industry.
well, I mean, I would make the argument that the music industry has been corrupted for a long time, and it wasn't. It there's been a lot of suppression of artists within the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
I would say anyone who's a real music artist,
Mm-hmm.
your first and foremost point about it, I think, is for your own love of it and your own passion of it. And I think if you're really genuine with your passion and your love of creating music, a big thing you're going to want to do is share that with as many people as possible.
Well, it's interesting how it transformed the market from this thing where we package the artist into a CD and everybody buys
Right.
it at the store to now we distribute music basically for free to build up a market so that we can perform in front of them.
Well, yeah, do a concert, whatnot, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of, I kind of see a point of reciprocity in there, and kind of like maybe a little bit of reciprocal economics,
Mm-hmm.
where you're sharing you because you like you and what you got to share, and that's how you'd want someone to treat you. So you share your good shit regardless. You're not sharing to get something specifically. You're sharing because it's a good shit.
Well, even if you are sharing to make a business out of it, because that's how
Sure,
you want to
sure,
make your life, you want to make a business
sure.
out of making music, because that's how
Yeah.
passionate you are,
Yeah, that's
then
cool.
fantastic, you
That's
can. But what
absolutely
you're not going to have anymore is this sick, twisted, shadowy industry of people deciding whether or not you can or cannot be successful.
exactly.
If you want to be an artist and you want to put it out there, you
It's open
can.
source.
It's open source. You can develop your market. Now, if you think that's hard, well, I'm sorry. The world is not easy. You have to get out there and you have to make life happen for yourself.
So it's interesting because almost the biggest critics of Napster was the people that were essentially like the rent-seeking middleman on it, like the big record companies, right?
And the big, 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 big acts who were
Right,
just feeding
right,
off of it. I
right.
mean, the
Just kind of
classic
like
one is classic one is Metallica, right?
right, like the sellout kind of bands almost in a
Well,
way.
Metallica's not a sellout, but that guy was
Well,
pissed
a
about losing.
little bit of a sellout, in my opinion.
Well, they had good music. I enjoyed their
Yes.
music.
Okay, so yeah.
So their music wasn't a sellout, in my opinion, not compared to like some of the crap that's getting churned out today. But they
I
were
would say there's
upset. They
different
were
degrees of
upset
sellout.
that they were going to go from making 10 million a tour or whatever they were making, 100 million a tour, to maybe
Right.
10 million or whatever, because they were cutting off their CD sales and all the
So
rest.
that to me was like a defining moment of Metallica being like a sellout and soft and kind of a puss band.
Well, I'll agree with
That's
you on
that's
that.
uh, that's a strong opinion, and it is opinion, and
No, no, I'll agree with you on that. I mean, because
okay,
but I don't think he understood what he was really looking at and what it was really going to do.
totally. So it was no judgment on it or
Mhm,
whatnot, but
mhm.
it just seemed like for me that was a defining point where the band really took a stance of being soft.
Well, hey, I don't want to hang out with that guy. He seems like a dick. But, but, but
Right.
if we're caught in history, like I've never been caught in history like that,
Right. Yeah.
and
So
if I
it's
had
not
been,
pigeon
I might have said
pigeonhole.
something like that too.
Totally. I mean, yeah, there is that part of you where it's like your payday is going from 10 million to 1 million. You might be like, what the fuck?
Right.
So
Yeah,
it's
it's painful. It's
yes,
painful.
it's understandable.
And he was speaking from a place of pain, which is an ignorant place because that's just the nature of it. And we'll get into, by the way, this is crypto philosophical. So we're going to end up talking about human
Oh,
consciousness and how decentralized networks can and may transform the way we do things at a fundamental level that may last, hundreds, maybe thousands of years in the future. We'll see. I mean,
I
there's a
mean,
lot to talk about here.
yeah, like we said, money is like basically the operating system for the world,
Right.
and
And that's what this is, the asymmetric key cryptography. So maybe you want to describe that just for a second?
yeah, sure. So, I mentioned before cryptography being an integral part to cryptocurrencies, that all cryptocurrencies essentially function as a form of cryptography. So specifically within cryptography, which I said was the art of writing and or solving codes, specifically what's used in most cryptos is the a form of asymmetric cryptography, where basically you have a key, okay, like a cryptographic public key and private key. The
Now, this is a mathematical equation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, how it works out. So from your private key, right, or you say your public key. Your public key is the thing you transact with, which you use with others. Like, let's say you wanted to send me some Bitcoin, you would give me, or I would give you my public key. Okay.
Right. And I would plug into that with my private key to access the global network.
You wouldn't actually have to. You're already kind of directly plugged in, like with your wallet, let's say, to your private key. You would have that information recorded in like backup in a safe place offline.
Yep.
And then you would also have a public key. Okay. And so from your wallet, it would then show, you would plug in my public key and it would be like send to my public key, and you sent it from your public key. So the broadcast, it shows the two public keys. The public keys can only be created from the initial private key. So it's a way to kind of have that point. Like if you were to ever, let's say you'd had a wallet downloaded that you were using just like on your phone for quick ease of use. Say you lost your phone or whatnot. And then that wallet was gone. You're like, oh shit. You could reactivate your Bitcoin in that wallet or the other cryptocurrency you're using based on having that data that, is your private key.
So I think what you're trying to say here is that it's incredibly safe.
Yes, it really is. I mean, in earlier days, I would say it's more and more going away and becoming more and more user-friendly, like the internet. Like most people don't know the different protocols that are involved in terms of how it is your message goes from here to here, right?
Yeah,
that's kind of like the same thing with this.
Yeah, people just know it works.
Yes.
and so they're
unfamiliar.
They're unfamiliar, and because they're unfamiliar, and because it's always sort of scary to do something unfamiliar, and you don't want to screw it up, especially when you're dealing with money. It's a real roadblock to adoption.
Right. So why, even I guess understanding this stuff is a little bit interesting. It's like I said, it's not imperative for everyone to know, but it is interesting in the fact that you can really empower yourself in terms of your own standing responsibility for your own finances and wealth. Because if you understand how this stuff works, all of a sudden you have this financial tool available to you that is incredible. That can
essentially what you're saying is we're going to teach people a little bit of that if they continue to subscribe.
And we'll do a whole episode on wallets and maybe even exchanges as well.
Sure.
And kind of really open up some of the opportunities that are available that were not available all that long ago.
That's right. So this is a learning channel, everything to know about cryptocurrency and its applications, present, past, and future, as well as education on how it works, how to use it, how to ease yourself in, how to just manage and adopt this whole thing, even if you don't plan on doing it as a major life change, but at least to know it, so that if it does start to dawn on you that you probably want to do something like this, then you might want to actually utilize our channel.
I've had so many friends over the years now who've just been like, well, this sounds kind of interesting. I don't have that much time or whatnot, but how about I take $100 or $1,000 or $50, kind of depending on the class of wealth of the friends I was talking to, how much they wanted to throw into it. But I find that to be like a super helpful way, right? Because if $10 is a lot to you, or $100 is a lot to you, or $1,000, putting a little bit into the thing, like skin in the game, as it's often referred to, will really, really support you learning and taking your shit seriously.
And we're not benefiting from that by the way.
No,
So if
no,
anybody's going to
yeah,
start
not
accusing us
financial
of trying
advice or
to sell you
whatnot.
something, we're not selling you something.
Yeah, this
Okay?
is
We're just talking about how
education.
to do it. We're just talking about
Exactly,
how to do it. So,
exactly.
so the various applications for Bitcoin, not Bitcoin necessarily, but just
I would say
decentralized
Bitcoin and
networks,
cryptocurrency.
right? Say decentralized blockchain technology are many. Right. And this is the philosophical part. We're going to be talking and focusing a lot on this part right here, which is payment processing and money transfers and what is money, what is sound money, what is the reality behind your money today versus what this is. But it also can be used because it's essentially a decentralized ledger of transactions that is distributed around an entire network. We're able to apply it as a monitor for supply chains. It's really good for loyalty rewards programs. So I'm actually working on a project that's about decentralized travel distribution, and the coin that's on that platform is a rewards program. It's also digital IDs. It's good for
Go
data
go
sharing.
go up to the supply chains just for a sec. I just feel
Sure,
like I should add just a little talking point on that.
sure.
So yeah, monitoring supply chains, that's a real issue. I mean, us humans, based on our current economic system, we're basically incentivized to cheat and steal so long as we can get away with it.
Because we're in debt, constantly fighting a
Right,
debt. Mm-hmm.
right. So basically, like, we're at a point now where so many of our goods in existence, goods and services, are compromised, are
Yeah.
shit, are less than the best quality.
Well, not only that, they're exposed to risk because all of our commodities support this inflated bank
Right,
debt paper
right,
market that you don't even know exists.
exactly. So businesses basically moving to accountability and transparency in terms of, like, look,
And if it
here's
isn't, we're in trouble.
yeah, because it's so bad. I mean, it's crazy that, you know what I mean, like, your food looks a certain way but it's fake
Hmm.
now, like that's a thing.
Yeah, and they also, they get the trademark and copyright for a word like natural, slap it
Right.
on everything that they
Yeah.
produce, and it has nothing to do with natural. It's just that that's their branding.
Yes, yeah, like 100% beef, right?
Mhm. All natural.
Yeah,
Thanks, Kraft.
yeah, that's a company,
Yeah.
fuckers.
Yeah, and it's not at all natural. It's just that that's the branding around the packaging, which is just another sleight of hand that's going on every single level in this society today. So
So it really just supports the supply chains. It really can support with trust and transparency in terms of legitimacy. There's a ways to go with this, but that is just a really cool point in my opinion.
mhm. And then going down to royalty programs, digital IDs. What do you got to
That's
say about that?
okay. This is a super interesting point, right? Because we've been in a digital world for, increasingly a long time. Um, Now it's such a fascinating point because, well, there's many people of the world that simply do not have identification because of where they were born in the world and monetary conditions. So
They're too busy picking up water from 3 miles away every day.
yeah, so it's like you're we live in a digital world, and a decent amount of the world population is not plugged into the digital world, which is a huge travesty. So, with
Why is it a travesty?
well, okay, it's like what you're saying about money and access to credit. If you don't have any access to credit, it's like saying you're not worthy to participate in life.
Hmm.
This is basically what it's saying.
Hmm.
And it's kind of like it's gotten so extensively organized that it's like this point of out of sight, out of mind.
Hmm.
Like, I live in a first world country.
Hmm.
That, I mean, that kind of makes me want to vomit every time I say it. Like, I live in a first world country because there's that comparison point to,
Well, there's
well,
an infrastructure that exists that doesn't exist elsewhere in some places.
exactly, like, that's a real thing. And amongst the majority of participants, I would say my peers inside the first world country, it's not really that much of a regard because most people within the first world country are so busy within their own realm of survival that it's like Well, yeah, it sucks that other people have it worse than we do, but we're still kind of fucked over here.
Well,
So
we're fucked because we're constantly dealing with the inflation of our own wealth. It's,
right,
we're
right.
we're we're constantly battling inflation, and every time these centralized banks keep flooding the market with new money, they're just
Yeah,
taking away bits of value from your existing storage,
yeah, you're losing a bit out of your swimming pool
and you
every
don't
time.
even know it. And that's the debt clock. That's what
Yes,
that is. That's that amount of debt
right.
that you are born with.
So the digital ID thing, it's a big issue. It's a big point because with the internet we are facing some challenges, and this maybe goes a point towards regulation
Hmm.
and transparency.
Hmm.
Is that cyberbullying has been a real problem on the internet, where some people seem to think that there's no accountability on the internet, that you can be a complete piece of shit
And you can
and
just say whatever and be
yeah,
reactionary to
like
everything.
abusive, like the worst
All
motherfucker.
it's really done, like social media and the connectivity network, like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and so on, YouTube and so on, is it's allowed people to make comments about other people, and
Right. Like
really
projecting their own shit.
all they're really doing is holding up a mirror to
Yes.
the basement level that they're willing to go at the drop of a hat.
Yeah. So in some regards, it's pretty cool to see like where we're at collectively as the psychology of humanity.
Hmm.
But as we move forward, I think it's imperative because we kind of live in a world still to this day, and it totally reflects the current reality of our financial systems.
Hmm.
Is that you can be as fucked and as full of shit as you want, and so long as you're good at being full of shit and fucked, it's fine. Like
No, I don't think that's the case. I think what
well, it's
happens
it's
is
not
if
fine,
listen,
but
listen, listen, listen.
okay, go with that.
I don't want to fight you to talk, but
No,
basically, the issue is you can be as low brow, basement level, low class as you want, so long as you got enough money.
yeah, okay, that's more eloquently put.
If
Yep.
you've got enough money, you can be whoever you want. And you are not held to any standard if you have enough money. And so the race is to have enough money. And if you don't have money, you're interdependent on your community.
Right.
And as a result of that, that corrects your personality. You have to hold in the crazy, or you have to work on yourself a little bit
Yeah.
in order to interact with your community, in order to literally thrive together, because that's the level you're at. But if you have this inflated, um, say, unnatural storage of value that actually has no value, that it's not attributed to your contribution to a real community, it's just a storehouse of value because you've been better at making money. You can be whoever you want, do whatever you want, and get involved in every dark corner of your desire and fear and anxiety and craving and everything. And really, that's sort of the negative effect of the monetary system, I would say, in
Yes.
relation to community and how one behaves in a authentic one-to-one. Like, I'm, I'll be honest, I'm on YouTube, for instance, and I'll make a comment on a video. And just to
Uh-huh.
be fair with everybody who's listening, we've all done it, right? We make a comment that we would never say if that person was standing right in front of us. And that is really what I'm saying. It's like the internet is this false community in a way, or it has been up to this point. It's just a mirror of like where we're willing to go when there are no consequences, no immediate consequences to what we say and
Right.
do.
Yeah.
Because everything is so intangibly distributed. I'm actually making a comment about somebody, I don't even know where they live. They're never going to find me, right? Because nobody can move around that fast. So, people who get into cyberbullying and all that kind of thing. So applying the laws, or reapplying the laws of community
Hmm.
into a digital environment, is something that is coming, I think. And
It
that's what
is.
digital IDs is really about in my mind. And so data sharing, the IOTA, if you don't know what that means, Internet of Things
Applications.
applications. So Internet of Things is a lot of these devices that we use, like this here. The computer obviously is a massive producer of information and data about your behavior,
Yeah.
about what you're into, about how you use things, when you use things, how often, on what settings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. almost everything that we can buy now at the store that has any sort of computer processor in it of any degree is creating data that it's contributing back to a network as user information. And that information is being ideally used to increase the efficiency and value of the products and services that are being offered to you. On the other side, it's being used to manipulate you, to manipulate the market, to create markets, to literally produce an emotional response on a massive scale to drive markets. So data sharing is something that is being, like, the big data is something that's just happening anyway. And it's happening through Google, it's happening through Facebook, it's happening through your computer hardware provider, it's happening through your devices of any kind, it's happening through, I mean, even chairs, workout environments.
Oh yeah. Basically, any social network, any network, pretty much at this point, online, that's of a substantial size, because that's it's just more data points that way. It is being like aggregated. That's the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Your travel habits. So people are plugging into, or these networks or these corporations are plugging into IPAs or creating IPAs, which are essentially aggregates of this information, and they're using it to more or less take over their market and aggregate. But in any case, there are applications within the blockchain which could allow you, and there are projects right now that are allowing you to own that information and decide for yourself if you want to monetize it. Could be a source of money for you. Could be that you don't want that information out, and so you more or less hold it off chain. And that being kind of a new application for the IoT of the internet. And so that's another thing. Copyright and royalty protection. When you have a distributed ledger that's immutable, meaning no one person can change it because it would have to hack every node on the network in order to change it, you basically have a much safer place to substantiate your copyright and royalty protections. Digital voting. This is a huge one. We don't know how this is going to apply.
Massive.
Because typically blockchain technology is synonymous cryptocurrency, and I don't know how that works within a digital voting system, and that's something for one of these cipher wizards to work out.
Delegated proof of stake.
Well, there you go. There you go. So we're going to talk about that as well. And then real estate, land, and auto title transfers, food safety, immutable data backup. Actually, I would include history in that. One of the things I like about blockchain technology is that the media, for instance, if you're not completely having your head in the sand, is an entirely manipulated propaganda machine, and the agenda is being dictated by those who own those channels. If you don't know that, you're either insane or you're completely unaware of what's going on. And that means that history is being manipulated to whoever's advantage it is to manipulate it. And that's been going on forever. That's how we have the Nazis. That's how we have the communists. That's how we have the United States of America going around the world with 806 foreign military bases versus all told less than 46 from every other country in the world, et cetera, et cetera. It's because history is being manipulated in order to keep these things going. So if we can create a distributed network where people contribute their experience from their perspective, goes on the blockchain, it's immutable, can't be manipulated, and you can always go to source document, that's a massive shift in what can and cannot be used in terms of the historical record. Tax regulation and compliance. Personally, I think taxes are going to have to completely transform from...
Oh, totally. Go
ahead.
I was just going to say, it's funny how this slant on it here, this way, because I kind of think what blockchain and cryptocurrency is going to do is going to force greater accountability on governments, and basically making it more and more easily comprehensible.
And decentralize the power of governments.
Well, absolutely. That's what will increasingly happen over time, I see, is that governments from employment standard will become smaller and smaller over time. And that's just because, it's irrelevant. It becomes more and more irrelevant for over time. Like they'll just become obsolete, I think.
I'm skeptical of medical record keeping.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, like does everybody's medical records have to be plugged in online?
Do I want
think,
everyone to know what my medical issues are? No,
right. So
probably not. And
so
that goes back to data keeping and whether you own your data about yourself in the IoT world or not, right?
For sure. I think, yeah, those are interesting talking points. I mean, I kind of think we're going into the world of artificial intelligence and singularity,
Mm-hmm.
and basically just all the information of existence is part of the collective here, and it just over time it won't become such a big thing. But I feel we're a bit of a ways off on that, because right now we're still very much in a way in our formative years, just because money is such an integral point of the operating system. And
Oh
so,
yeah, and weapons. I mean, if you don't have money to make weapons, you can't make weapons. So weapons dismantling, like military dismantling. I don't know. This is blue sky kind of idealistic comments that I'm making. So please don't just like think, oh, these guys are a couple of morons. No, we're just talking about what we're going to get into.
Yeah, we're breaking the ice here today.
And this is a real long-term discussion, and we're going to have to go deep into every aspect.
It really is. Yes.
But obviously, that's my bent, right? We need to do that.
Another interesting point I just want to say on the weapons, and I would expand it to
it's so military. Funny, we have this smiley woman here with, weapons tracking. It's like, hi, I'm your weapons accountant.
Yeah, I would say there's an interesting point here with weapons, also to take it into like military and like private militias, where it's going to become, and it's kind of already happening, where it's becoming increasingly easy for private militias to grow in strength and size that are like counteracting units of enforcement that challenge nation state militias. I think you're going to see decentralized militaries more so as kind of a
However, if you engineer money so that it can't be used for the purchase and sale of weapons, then you can't purchase and sell weapons. You take the value out of the entire
industry. Out of weapons. Yeah, to take the piss out of weapons would be a pretty cool thing on it.
And do it mathematically so that it can't be hacked because it's decentralized. I mean, that's a blue sky thing for sure. But it's something that
it's possible.
It is possible.
I kind of totally took it as like, well, you know what? If there's going to be this like arms race type thing,
we've been in that. We've been in that for 5,000 years.
We have been in that
5,000-year-old arms race that we've been in. It started with the atlatl, and it went on to, bronze, and then it went on to iron, and it went on to other metals, and now it's into money. The arms race of money and weapons of mass destruction. I mean, we've been in an arms race.
Yeah, it's
5,000 years. I'd like to end the arms race.
I'm totally cool with that.
Yeah. So that's the kind of ideas that we're going to explore in that realm. Then, of course, wills and inheritances, equity trading.
If anybody doesn't know about wills or inheritances, it's quite the racket.
If you die in France, 50% goes to the French government.
Well, that's fair, though, right?
Oh yeah. Death tax. They're looking at changing that just because it's so egregiously corrupt, and because it's a socialist system. I mean, obviously the youth are benefiting from a lot of what that equity is going towards, but of course there's a mismanagement of those equities. I mean, if the true value of all the amount of equity that people or the government is getting from all the people who just happen to die on their soil and own stuff in their jurisdiction, the French would just be fabulously wealthy beyond belief, right? But that money is being funneled into other things. So
totally. I mean, government is just like a really shitty business that's always just sucks.
No, it's a racket. It's a in my opinion, from a money perspective, it's really organized crime.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Like just organized crime. That's all it is. Which is why I'm anonymous. Equity trading. At some point, blockchain could rival and replace current equity trading platforms. You have a big appreciation for polymath as one of the sort of platforms that you like, 'cause it's taking securities and putting them on the blockchain.
Yes, yes, I do. I think what they're doing is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk more about them. I think
Absolutely.
we actually have in other episodes.
Yes, yes, we have, and we will
But
continue to do so. So managing the Internet of Things networks just goes back to this whole thing here. Where is it? Where did it go? God, it's all the way back. Huh?
IoT.
Uh-huh. Yep, data. Well, that data is coming from the Internet of Things. So, you know, all that information that is coming at these networks and is really monitoring you from a consumer perspective through the products and services that are producing that data, whether it be sophisticated products like your computer or unsophisticated products like your flashlight or, you know, your chair, literally, or if you have a bed cooling system that's connected by IoT. You should look into what is IoT and what of your products and services at your home. Like Nest, for instance, a lot of homes use Nest to monitor their homes and keep them energy efficient and so on. And all that data is going into the IoT of things. So it's a big market. That's why they call it big data. So expediting energy futures, trading, and compliance, I'd say that's really kind of a misnomer. I would like to see energy in general be decentralized in terms of its production and distribution.
Yeah.
I have a project in that area, and so we'll talk about that.
Yes.
And then securing access to belongings.
That's kind of an interesting point. I mean, I can give you like a super simple example where basically it's like you registered let's say your bicycle, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's just like it's got your bike's got the code on it, and you time stamped it, and you noted it. So
yeah, and you know where it is. It's trackable. And,
yeah, and it can be, you know, verified, so to speak.
I've seen projects that are doing this already. They're sort of monitoring your drug use so that you can essentially get people to take their prescriptions properly. I'm not a big pharmacological proponent. I think that pharmacology is really the engineering of the human experience from the endocrine system point of view and brain chemistry, and I don't want anybody touching me that way. So there's all kinds of opposition I have to that. But it is an application if people want it. So, you know, a lot of this stuff is opt-in, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And, you know, so you can make choices, essentially. And there are a lot of other applications, and we'll get into them.
For sure.
And that's what this show is about. So we've gone through that. We went through Mr. Jens Wienerman.
Yeah.
What else? Here's your exchanges.
That's just one of the exchanges. There's okay, go to the top of that. What's the volume on this one here? Though these numbers could be hocus pocus.
468,000.
So yeah, there's a lot of different cryptocurrency exchanges, increasingly so throughout the world. It's kind of interesting because before cryptocurrency markets, it was very difficult for the average person to simply jump into trading in world markets.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this is something I want to point out, is that it's usually one of the narratives that gets used to discredit Bitcoin is that it fluctuates in value.
Oh, yeah.
And yet the Forex market, and I'm sure most of you have heard of that, is the exact same thing. It's the buy and sell of currencies worldwide. And of course, that generates massive fluctuations in value over time.
Yes.
So there's nothing different about Bitcoin except that it's not owned by any one centralized entity.
Yes. And, you know, there's only going to be 21 million Bitcoin max. So, you know, as time goes by, accessing just one Bitcoin is going to be increasingly more difficult.
Right, and this is where it comes into the whole gold 2.0 thing as a storage of value. Because it is scarce, because it is not easy for governments to just issue more of it, and there's nobody on the network that can do that, it really points to what is sound money. So let's talk about that. Is Bitcoin sound money versus all this other money that is being manipulated and factored and lent and create into into just monumental, as unheard of, forms of debt on a global scale exceeding even 1 gazillion at this point. So,
So I like to think of Bitcoin as sound money, but I don't often like to use, that as like a term and a definition so much so.
hmm.
Just because, it gets associated sometimes with like hype and just like
Speculation.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
and their speculation, though, interestingly enough, is kind of a real thing. Like it's like one of the first real network effects on any new thing that people begin to be interested in.
Hmm.
It's really kind of like the speculation has become such an integral part of basically driving the value in terms of like market and
Well,
price
let's look at
discovery.
it again. If there wasn't a speculative effect, do you think this many nodes would exist that are contributing to the overall sustainability and longevity and value
No, no,
of Bitcoin?
definitely not.
Of
Definitely
course.
not.
So it has a role to play.
Yeah, so it's I find that to be an interesting point on the speculative point because I would say it's more common for people to basically shit on the fact that people are speculating on its value.
Well, that's just the scare tactic
It is,
that
and
is
just it's
easy
important
to
to make
employ
note of.
against a mass of people who are essentially uneducated about all things financial.
Yes, absolutely agreed.
And
Absolutely agreed.
so and so even though it's the most common aspect of the existing financial network to the degree that derivatives markets are way up here now in terms of their speculative value,
Mhm.
this one gets Bitcoin gets a bad rap because it's speculative in nature, which is absurd.
For sure.
Because it's a finite resource and it's mathematically predetermined and cannot be broken, hacked, or altered in any way towards its. This is the beauty of it from a mathematical perspective, is that it is backed by sound math.
Yes.
And so when you think about, it says sound money is typically synonymous with a currency that is backed by something or pegged to some good or commodity.
Yeah,
What
we
could
got
be
math.
better than an immutable mathematical finite reality that is supported and powered by a network that is decentralized
People.
worldwide,
Yes.
wherein incentive is embedded in the entire system to encourage the continued growth of this decentralized network?
Well, it's so absolutely brilliant because what this is a trustless system you can trust in, and trust is like the key to anything substantial being created in our reality here.
Mm-hmm. Now, a
Like
lot of
that.
these other cryptocurrencies that have emerged, yes, they're a little bit different in some cases. I mean, Ethereum is.
Yeah, they're all a little different in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ones that are copycat or you could say clones.
Mm-hmm.
But this is part of the beauty of what's happening here. They're all different experiments,
Mm-hmm.
and each one of them has different communities of people that have formed around them for whatever reasons. Something interested them about it or whatnot. You could argue and say, well, some people are better than other people because they're interested in this or that. But I'm kind of the attitude that it's all good. It's all good for the space because people are playing around, mucking around. Within that, there is consequences that exist where there is, some positive outflows, but also some negative outflows. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would say a big negative outflow that we've seen over the last year and a half is in terms of education within the
Mm-hmm.
space, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how responsible you are as a wealth manager and an investor,
Well, you have to
because
focus pretty hard to understand the nuances of every single coin
of
that's
all
out
these
there.
things, right? Yeah,
And
there's like new vocabulary within all of them.
mhm. And they all intend to sort of solve a different problem because there's really only one Bitcoin, right? Unless there's
There
a
is,
duplicate of Bitcoin, like a copycat of the Bitcoin, there really is only one Bitcoin. And
yes,
so, and Ethereum, because it's unique in its ability to sort of serve as a base layer for applications of unlimited variety, and it continues to evolve as a base layer to incorporate more usability. It's unique, which is why it has a market cap the way it does. XRP, tell me about it.
that's like a banking coin. It's a utility token. It's made to use for banks to make settlement faster for bank wire transfers, essentially.
Okay, and
And
so if you think banks aren't really adopting this stuff, look at that market cap. This wouldn't exist as a market cap, and it wouldn't be number 3 on the total market cap if mainstream banks weren't adopting this entire market.
correct. So
So
it's
if you think banks are turning away from it or hiding from it, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. There are others that are coming out that are intended to be sort of an advancement, like EOS is really supposed to be an advancement on Ethereum in terms of use.
yes, in a lot of ways. It's like this general purpose blockchain that is designed to be super easy for businesses to plug into, which will streamline the efficiency and effectiveness of their business from an operating.
So essentially what's poised to happen is that all these gateways, these doorways for the flooding in of the storage of value into finite currency systems, which by their finite nature will increase in value as more and more adoption occurs.
Yes.
We're just really looking at the potential transition from this inflated, completely, we don't have to tell that story today, this inflated, completely corrupt, completely criminal system of debt slavery into a trustless, ownerless, self-generating, self-operating distributed network that is going to potentially house all the storage value of the human potential and be lightning fast in its ability to transact that value and be decentralized in its ability to go peer-to-peer. So it's not inflation. It's not going to be subject to traditional inflation. It's not going to be subject to the egregious just printing of money. It's not going to be subject to counterfeit the way we know it today. And it's an opportunity for all of us to say no to this and this and this and say yes to this. I mean, that's what the decentralized system is.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating because it really is the people of the world, if you're interested in kind of rectifying the injustices that we've accepted and allowed in the monetary system.
I mean, here's a great analogy for me because I'm not high on nuclear power, right?
Okay.
So do I want to contribute tax dollars to a government that's going to go out and sell nuclear power around the world?
Probably not.
Probably not. So do I want to financially empower that organization to do so?
No.
No. And if on a basic fundamental moral level, you're not, I mean, basically in general, 99% of the people do not want to go to war. They don't want to go to war. They don't want to see people suffer.
Don't want to support the war.
They don't want to see people going into debt slavery because they don't like it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So there is already this agreement on a very basic level that the entire system that is not in our control is no longer necessary to have these institutions in control of us the way they've been in control of us by virtue of our giving them that control.
Correct. And so this is a real problem, Stacy.
Mm-hmm.
Oops.
I'm here.
Okay. For this is a real problem for government regulation. Mm-hmm. How do you control the world and keep the world suppressed where we have a world of haves and have-nots, but basically division? Mm-hmm. If people can voluntarily decide to stop supporting inferior systems.
Yeah, in future episodes, we are talking about more or less the various types of dissent that are out there. You know, there's obviously protest culture, and there's all this energy, this massive energy being poured into various things that we think are going to change things. Yes. Well, if a lot of that energy and a lot of that willingness to make change is just poured into the monetary system by virtue of adoption of a decentralized money network, we're going much further and much faster towards the end goal, which is the transition of centralized power and centralized money and centralized systems and authority to decentralized power, money, and authority and systems. And now I'm not saying that this isn't an option that isn't fraught with risk.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It
There's a bunch of
absolutely
risk.
is right now.
Yeah.
Everything that is
It's never been more risky
cryptocurrency
than ever.
is risky. Why is
Yeah.
it risky? Well, maybe for reasons that you don't realize, but one of
I
the
mean,
things is that just the internet is under someone's centralized control and
yeah.
in various factions around the world. That's one big risk to this.
I
The
mean, if we
other,
were in China, I don't know, it'd be pretty risky doing this broadcast.
exactly. We could have people bashing down the door,
Or
trying to bring us in, trying to question
Thailand.
us, trying to gag us, all that kind of thing. But if we're pouring our focus, which is really what these things are, is just focus, attention and value and transaction. It's just focus. It's agreement among people, whether you know them personally or not, to invest in a trusted system that actually works. So really what this channel is about, and we want to thank you for hanging in this long, is just the education around what this is, because we're learning with you, because it's evolving as we go along. And so we're going to continue to talk about it. We're going to bring in people to talk about it with us. And we're going to cover it from every angle, from the bedrock to the technology, to its applications, to its philosophical outcomes, or one could say its potentialities, and more or less just ease people into it so that they get to really get familiar with it, and hopefully that's a service that will be of value to you.
Well said. Well said.
Anything else you want to talk about at this exact moment, or just carry on and say, hey, go ahead off to the next episode, and we'll see you there?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. All
Look
right.
forward to continuing onward, guys.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and don't forget to subscribe. Hit the bell so that you get a notification when there's new episodes. They're not all going to be this long. This is our introductory episode. And enjoy. Just enjoy and contribute. Make your comments. We'll get into them, and share. Help us get out there. Thanks a bunch. I am Anonymous.
And I am Crypto Mike.
We'll talk to you soon.